In this lecture, we'll learn how to work with databases in our website. A database is going to store all of the information that we need to store to make the website run. That means users that register, or items that people may post, or blog entries, and other information that users might submit to a website, or that might be used to create pages dynamically. The first thing that we'll learn how to do is how to create a table within a database. Then we'll learn how to create a row in a table. So this will be a user would register and submit information from a form, and then we'll store that information into a table. Then we'll learn how to list out all of the rows within a table. Then we'll learn how to show a single row in a table, and then we'll learn how to edit a single row in a table, and finally we'll learn how to delete a row in a table. Now before we start, you should have learned in class how to use the IS2 machine to create a database, and you'll do that through cPanel, and hopefully you'll see that demonstration in class, and you'll be able to do it and create your own database within cPanel, and then you'll learn how to get to PHP My Admin, which is where we'll be able to create a table. If you'll remember, in the forms lecture we created this register page where a user can come up with a login, foobar, and put in their email address, and then also their password. And if they got everything right, well, if they mess up, then they have to make sure they get everything right. And when they get everything right, they'll see this page, you are registered. And we left off putting up this comment in the code saying they were going to put information into the database. So back to the form right here. The information that we're going to store in the database will be their login, their email, and then their password. Now in your site you might want to store some additional information. You might want to get their gender, their birthday, or other information. And but for this demonstration, those are the three things that we'll store about with users. But you can certainly add more fields to this form as needed. So the first step would be to create a database table. Now once you get to PHP My Admin, and you should have already created your database, and then you've gotten to the PHP My Admin. Once you get to this, you'll see the databases that you've created over here. And as you could tell, this database you might not see, you might not have privilege to see, but this is something that I'm working on. You probably won't see the MySQL, but you should see the database that you created. So I created the test database. Now it might be tempting to go and create another database through PHP My Admin, which you certainly can do, but I suggest that you create the database using the wizard that cPanel gives you, because it also gives you a user that you can use to access that database. So once you create a database, we can click on that database, and then we can create tables. Now for your website, you'll only want to create one database per application that you're going to create. And then you'll create several tables within that database. Now you might be tempted to create several databases and then have one table in each one, but you really want the tables to all the tables that apply to one web application to be inside of one database. So for this class you only need to create one, maybe two databases. You could create one database to do your practice problems with, and also your assignments, and then when you start working on the final project you might create your second database that has the tables for the final project. So I'm going to create my table to store the users that register. I'm going to call it users, and now there's three fields that we're storing from the user. We're storing the login, their password and then the email as well. But we also want to create a database ID for them, something that can uniquely identify each row in our table. This, you'll usually want to do this for every table you create. You just call it ID, and it's an integer. So we're going to create a table with 4 fields in it, and when we do that, we get this form right here. It doesn't fit all on the page, so unfortunately we have to scroll back and forth, but we'll fill out the fields right here. So we have the ID field. It's going to be of type integer. We don't need the length on that one. Default will have none. So look at the coalition. There's lots of things there, but we don't need to worry about them. Attributes. We could make it unsigned if we want to, because we're not going to have negative integers, so that's fine. If we click this null box right here, this means that it can be blank, but we never want the database ID to be blank, so we're going to leave this unchecked, and that means that we always have to have an ID assigned for every row. I'm going to make this the primary index, and this right here stands for auto increment, I believe, and that means that it will start getting assigned by the database, so we don't have to actually worry about filling in this field. The database will automatically create these IDs for us. So that's the ID field. Now we'll create the login field, and this one's going to be type varchar. This means it could be variable characters. Usually up to 255 characters is the most you can go, but we don't need it to be 255 characters. I'm going to limit them to 15 characters. Now when I do this as part of my validation, I should make sure that the login is 15, is only 15 characters long. So I already validated it, made sure that it was at least 3. I should add another validation to make sure that it's less than 15 right here. There will be no default because we're always going to get that from the user. This default value might be if we don't want to fill it in right away when we create them, it can default to a certain value. We'll see that later on when we start talking about in a couple of lectures from now. Again, nothing there, nothing there. We want them to always have a we want them to always fill this in, so we won't let it be null. It can't auto increment. Now the index here, we might want to put a unique constraint on this. What that'll do is it'll make sure that no 2 users can choose the same login. We want that because if 2 users do choose the same login, they have different passwords, and then, I mean, we could try to identify them by their passwords, but if their passwords just happen to be the same, then we have 2 users with the same username and password, and which user would we want? So this unique forces the login to be different for each user. The next field that we'll store will be their email address. Again, a variable character right here. And email, 40 characters should be long enough to store an email. If it's not, we can always come in here and make it longer. Maybe 80 characters just to be sure. And then again, this should be part of our validation, because if they enter an email that's longer than 80 characters, it will cause us problems. So when we set a limit on these links, we should validate that when they send their email in, that it's not longer than 80 characters. And if you want to make sure that they only have each email address only has one account, you could put a unique constraint on that, but we won't. We'll just leave it alone. That way I could create 2 accounts with 1 email. There is a way that you can limit that, restrict it by just saying the email has to be unique as well. And the last field, I'm going to call this the hashed password. We're not going to store the password in plain text in our database. It just makes it too easy for people to, if they gain access to our database, they might find people's passwords. And sometimes people use the same passwords for this as they would their bank account. So then people can read their password and then they could try logging into some banks using that username password. Although my site, I don't really care about how secure it is, but it is usually most ethical to always keep the passwords hashed up so you can't read them. This is going to be a varchar, and the length of it is going to be 40. We'll discuss why it's 40 later on, and again, we won't make it unique. So now we have all of those signed up and filled out. So if everything has gone well, we'll just save this table right here. And now you could see that we have these 4 fields in our table. This is the users table. And there's an ID that's int, it's unsigned, it auto increments. And then we see that the login is a varchar 15, email 80, hash password 40. These are some default values. We could change this if we wanted to. And then we can, from here we can edit rows, we can make them the primary key. This one's already the primary key, make them unique, and other things right here. And we can look at our keys down here. We see that we have our primary key on the ID. These are actually called indexes, but we're also making sure that the login is unique. And we could create other indexes. Indexes help us look up information fast. We'll either be looking up these users by their ID, or we'll be looking them up by their login as they come to register. So those are the 2 most common actions. You might want to, if you're going to look somebody up by, say, their email all the time, then you might want to put an index on their email as well. Now that we have our database table created, we can start working on putting the information that the user submits into the database. The first step that we need to do is we need to make a connection to the database, and we do that with the function mysql connect. This is a built-in function. With my text editor, built-in functions turn red, normal functions turn white. So this lets me know that I typed it right. There's 3 parameters, and the first one is the machine name, or the IP address of where the database is running. Now for the IS2 machine, the database is running on the IS2 machine. So the web server and the PHP scripts are running on the IS2 machine, as well as the database server. They're all running on the same machine. So you can put in the IP address or the machine name as localhost. Localhost means the same machine that the PHP script is running on. Now if your database server happens to be running on a different machine, then you'd either put that machine name in here or the IP address of that machine name. The second one will be the second one will be the PHP or the database user that you created that gave them permissions to access that database. So mine on the IS2 machine, it started out as cslade and then PHP user. And then the third parameter will be the password. I used a simple password like that. That's why when you create these user accounts, there's kind of a balance. You don't want to use your password that you use for everything else because it's going to show up in the code. But you don't want to make something easily guessable, because then people could hack your database. Luckily, the firewall around campus, it will prevent people from connecting directly to the database that are outside of campus. And the IS2 machine actually might prevent connections from outside sources as well. But that connects us to the database server, and now we need to tell them which database to use. So that will be my SQL select database, and my database was called test. Now yours might have been called your username and test, something like that. So these two lines of code are the lines of code that are going to connect you to the database and select which database you're going to use. So hopefully as you created your database on the IS2 machine, you remembered your username, your password, and the database name as you created it. You should have entered all those into the wizard, and then you put them in here in your code. Now, knowing that my site's going to use the database on almost every page, I don't want to have to type these functions into every page, so I'm going to include them in my I'm going to include cut them out of here and include them in my functions page. And I'm going to create a function called function connect to the database, and just paste those lines in right there. Now, since I'm using this on my local machine, I have a little different setup. I don't really create a user, I just use the root database, and then I have the firewall block everybody from using my database. So I don't have to worry about having a password, and then the database is test. And so this is the one that I have to use in here. I'm going to comment this out. I'll go ahead and put this in here. This is what you probably want to use for your this function is probably what you'd want to use. It's if you want your username here. So let's put your DB username and then password and then your DB name right there. And I don't include a password for mine, so that's how I connect to my database on my local machine. And now, to make sure that that gets in here, I'm going to require the functions page. Now let's see if that all worked. And if you notice, we have this error right here, cannot redeclare connect DB previously declared. In the functions, that's line 6. So this might be a hard error to track down, but the problem is that I'm requiring this functions page twice. If we look at our header page, I require the functions page in here, and then I print my header. So it's required once. So when I require the header, I also require the functions page. So that's where you might forget that you're requiring things more than once, and that's why they create the require once function. And then in my header page, I'm going to require that once as well. And so that prevents the error. And now we got it working again. Okay, so the next step, I'm going to create this if statement. If there was a valid post so far, that means that it was a post in our form and it passed all of its validations. Again, you should have more. Remember, when I was creating the database, I should make sure the login isn't over 15, and also the email, that its length is the appropriate length and a valid email, and so on. So if it passed all of those validations, and again, you should add more validations for your site, then we'll go ahead and insert the database and insert it into the database. I had that area down there to do it, but we'll go ahead and do it up here, because we could still possibly invalidate this post by them selecting a login that's already been taken. So that might make them create another login, and so we'd want to represent the form. So we could still invalidate the post, but we'll go ahead and start to insert the information they sent us into the database. And how we do that is we create a string. I'll just call mine SQL query, and we go ahead and write our SQL statement that will manipulate the database the way we want to. So in this case, we want to insert a row into the table. So the SQL statement for that is insert into, and the table name is users. So when we created the table, that's the name that I gave it. I gave it the name users. And then I'm going to tell them which columns in that table I'm going to provide information for. So I'm going to provide the login, the email, and the hashed password. Now, I'm not going to provide it an ID, so I'm not going to put that in here. The database, since I set that to auto increment, will automatically create an ID when I insert a new user, so we don't have to include the ID. So now we have all of this, and the next step is values right there. So now we have insert into the users table. I'm going to give them these fields right here, and then I'm going to add the values here. So the first thing might be the login. Now notice I do a dot equals. This means take this string and add onto it. I'll go ahead and put a space, or put a space up there. So add onto it, and then I'll put little quote marks in here, and now we need to include the login. So let me end this quote string right there. Let me get it. Okay, so now there's a lot of quote marks and stuff going on here, so let me explain each one. This one begins the string, then we have a parenthesis, then we have a single quote mark which doesn't affect it, but that quote mark will end up in the string. Then we have another double quote mark, and that ends the string, and we concatenate onto it the login right here, and then we're going to concatenate on the rest of it, and another double quote mark right there to start a string, and a single quote mark, and then an ending parenthesis. So that's an entire string. So let's go ahead and see what it looks like. So I'll go ahead and echo out this, and we'll see how it looks if we get everything right. So Fred here is going to create an account, and if he gets everything right, now we see insert into users and the values, and we see that Fred gets put right there. We still need to add some more stuff, so I'm gonna end it right there. We still have to add the email and the hash password, so let's add those really quick. So I'm going to put another quote mark, and the email we'll put in here. And then end it with a quote mark and a comma space. So now let's see what that looks like. So now we have insert into values Fred, comma, space, and then Fred at byuh.edu. So next, or last, is the password. Now, remember I said we don't want to store the password in plain text. We actually want to create a hash out of it. So I'm going to create a variable called hashed password. For right now, I'll just let it equal the password that we're typing in. So we'll just take that and we'll add it into this SQL query down here. And because I don't have any quote marks in this variable name, I could just put hashed password right in there, and then the ending parenthesis and a semicolon. C line 28. I forgot a semicolon there. And let me try this again. So Fred. And now we get inserted into login, email, hash password, Fred, and the password I typed in was Fred. So we normally don't want to store the passwords in plain text, so one thing that we could do is we can create a hash. And we can do that with the SHA1 function right there. And what the SHA1 function does is create a unique string of 40 characters. They could be capital case, lowercase, and basically it kind of hashes this up and makes it a really messy string that no one can read or understand. There's only the same password will create that same string. So there's almost only the same thing that we include to get mashed up can create that unique string. So when I refresh this, after I save it, now we have this string of numbers, lowercase letters, right there. And now if I store this in the database, nobody's going to know what the password really is. They'll have to run it through this this hash right here, or plain text passwords, run them through that hash and then see if they're equal. But if you notice, it's not random. Every time we hash out Fred, we're always going to get this. So another thing that we could do is maybe concatenate on some other field like their login. That way, if two users have the same password, of course they have to have different logins because it can only have one login, then their passwords won't hash to the same thing. So now you can't create a user and keep changing their passwords and then seeing what their passwords might be in the database, because it's not just their password that's getting hashed up. And so this is just some security functions that we're implementing in. So now, and then we can even add in some sort of separator and to make it hard for people to come up with that. But now this will be our hash function right here, and notice it's always 40 characters in length. And now we have created our SQL query right here, which is basically just a string variable, and we just created it. We inserted the information that was sent in the form inside of it. We manipulated the password a little bit to make it hashed up. And now we're just printing out the query. So the next step is to actually run the query to insert this into the database. Okay, now to run the function, the first thing that we need to do is call the connectDB function. We included it in the functions page, but I never went over that we actually have to call the function right here. So we included it, but now we have to call it, and that calls the MySQL connect and select DB. Once we've done that, then we can use the function MySQL query, and we can pass in the SQL query that we just created, which is basically just the string that tells the SQL database how to insert something into the row. Now, we'll want to know whether this succeeded or failed, and it can fail for several reasons. One reason might be that we didn't connect to the database, if I forgot to put that in. Another reason might be that the SQL query itself isn't valid, that we missed a comma somewhere, or the column name isn't what we named it in the database. So if I misspelled email, that would not let it work. So some sort of invalid syntax. And another thing that might happen is the login might be a duplicate login. So we might insert a row into the database, but the login would create two of the same one. So we'll see that happen as we test it. So if the result isn't true, then we know, and I missed the order of these. So if not result, then we know that something went wrong. We might not know what it is. So there's a function called MySQL error that should print out the problem on the screen. You can decide whether you want to include this in your code when you're completely done or not. Obviously, if it's a duplicate login error, we might not want to print it out, the MySQL error, but for debugging purposes, this definitely helps. So now that we have that, everything should work. So we'll save this. One thing that we can also do here is we can say valid post equals false. If we had some sort of error, we don't want the person thinking that they actually registered. So we'll represent the form. We'll also do some errors later on, but let's check to see if what we have works. So now we'll go over to this register page, and we'll go register Fred. And we'll go to register, and we didn't get any error, and it ended up saying you are registered. And here we have the hash password and the SQL statement that hopefully now ran. So to be able to test this, so go to phpMyAdmin, we'll click on the users table, and now we can browse it. Let's click on this link right here, and we can see that Fred has been inserted into the table right there. And so that means that it worked. So let's, if I try to refresh this page, this is like me sending the form again, we'll see this right here. Notice the form's coming up again. We're not getting an error message, but something didn't go right. So I believe the reason why we didn't get the error message is because I forgot to echo out the MySQL error. So we'll go ahead and resend this form. and now we get the duplicate entry for Fred for key login, which is meaning there's already a Fred in there, so we can't create another Fred. And just to make this look a little nicer, not that we want this error being printed out on our production website. We probably want to make it look nice and have some sort of nice error right there. But go ahead and send this, and now we see duplicate entry for Fred for key login. So the login has a duplicate entry. So now what I can do is, if this PHP error message, and now instead of printing it out, I'm going to save it as SQL error right here. Now we can parse this error string out and make sure that it really does say duplicate entry. We just might want to take the first word and see duplicate. If we're doing it for email, then we'll also have to check this thing right here. So I'm going to leave that as an exercise for the users. If you want to make sure that this is really a duplicate entry, then what you can do is you can parse through this string and make sure it says duplicate to begin with, and then you can also parse and make sure that it ends with login. It might also end with email. It might have both right there. So you'll just have to find out what the MySQL error is, and then parse through this string. You can parse through this string now with the functions given to you in the strings chapter of the textbook. But I'm going to just assume that it's going to be a duplicate login error. So we'll go errors equals true, and we'll add in a duplicate login error. It's true. And now, since there's two errors on this, there's other ways that we can handle this. I'm gonna just create an error string right here. I'm gonna start it off as blank, and instead of creating these, we'll still create these individual variables, but now we can put in the error string. And we'll concatenate onto it the error messages that we were going to put down here. And so now we have the passwords do not match there. Concatenate onto this. Right here, this second one. Login to short here, and then I'm just going to say up here I'm going to have the same login errors because that will highlight the same field. So login errors, which is the same thing that we set to true here if the login isn't long enough, and then we'll add this string instead of login to short. We'll just say login name already taken by another user. So now if there's an error, I'm just assuming that the error is going to be caused because of a duplicate login. That might be a false assumption. It could be that we're not connecting to the database. But for this exercise, that should be sufficient. And now this error string will contain all the error messages, and now it simplifies this because now what we have to do is echo that error string right here. And so now we'll try submitting the form again. Scan line 24, I forgot a semicolon. Line 40 right here as well. And now we have at least the logins getting highlighted. Error string, error string, error string. I forgot an S there. So we'll refresh this. Login name already taken by another user. So now we might want to style that a little bit better. See, let's say with 60%. So now multiple errors might show up in here. We still have to test it if they leave the login blank. Login's too short. And if the password is off. Passwords don't match. Notice that you're not going to get the login is already taken until you run the query, so if the passwords or some other validation doesn't match, you'll get those first and then they'll submit, and then they'll find out that their login's already taken. But all their information is getting entered in, so it's not too hard to fix it. So we have, with that, it seems like we have created, you have our register page created. Test it one more time and make sure. And now that we have this there, we can always comment out this echo statement printing out the query, so that it doesn't show up inside of our page. But sometimes we might want to uncomment it out. Let's say that for some reason I can't figure out why it's not working. I'm trying to register another foo bar. Right there, I don't know why the error is coming up. So one thing that I can do is I can copy and paste, or copy this SQL statement that we're trying to run, and if we can't figure out the error, we can always print out the error message in the PHP page, but we can always go back to our database and paste it in this SQL window right here. Click go, and now we see duplicate entry for foobar. Again, and also to show you that foobar has been inserted into our table. So just reviewing what we've done, we created a database table with phpMyAdmin, and then we modified this form page to create a SQL statement. We ran it, and then we did a little modifying of the error page. We simplified it, the logic a little bit, and we also test and make sure that they don't have a duplicate login. Okay, now the next step will be to list out all the users. And before we start with that, I just want to mention that this same process can be used to create anything. As you work on your projects, you can instead of just registering users, you can create blog posts or comments in the exact same way. You'll have the same fields, or you won't have the same fields, but you do it the same way. You'll have a form. The form should work the exact same way. Instead of inserting a new user, you might insert in a new blog post or whatever else that you want to within your assignment. So even though that this looks specific to just users, the same process can be used to create a table of blog posts or comments or anything else that you come up with that you're going to do for your final project. And in the future, after this class, any sort of information that you want to collect and store into a database, you can use the same process. So The next action that we'll talk about is listing out all of the rows in a database table. So for this database table, we're going to list out all the users. Now for your blog, you might want to list out all the blog posts, or maybe more than one. Maybe not all of them, just the last 3, but the same principles apply for the users table as it would for a blog post table or any other table. So to do that, I'm first going to go to my functions, and I'm going to rename the resume link to the list or users, maybe members of the site. I'm going to call this members.php. So the members page is the page that's going to list out all of the users. So now back at our site we have this members page. So let's go ahead and create a members page. Start off with a new page, and I'm going to save this in my web directory as members.php. Okay, so the first thing we want to do is we want to require the header and require once the functions and we also want to print the header. We're going to call this the title. The subtitle will be members, and we want to highlight the members link there. So now we have our members. Now we can require a footer. So now our members page will at least be up and running. Now let's make sure that we connect to our database. Right there. And so now we can do this anywhere within our site, but usually before I print the header and stuff, I'll go ahead and do any database actions that I know that I might need to do. The reason is maybe sometimes I might want to redirect the user, which we'll talk about in the next lecture on how to do that. But I usually do the actions up here, but you can do them within your after you printed out the header in the middle of your content as well, wherever you want to do it. But the first step is to write your SQL query. And to get the members out, we use a select statement. Now if we just use this statement right here, it selects everybody. If you want to limit it to like a certain number, if you're doing pages, I believe you could go limit 0 to 3, that gives you, or maybe 1 to 3, that gives you the last 3 results. Of course you'll have to use an order by statement. So there's lots of stuff you can do here. We'll just get out all the users and we'll order by, we'll do an order by the login name. So we'll sort them by the login name alphabetically. And now we need to run it, so we'll just echo it out first and make sure that it looks the way we want to. My semicolon. Select star from users order by login. So hopefully that'll work. If you notice, I always kind of keep this echo statement here, so if anything goes wrong with my SQL query, then and I can look at my query and see, and just copy and paste it into phpMyAdmin if I need to. But now we'll run it, MySQL query. But obviously it's also valid to just kind of put the string right there if you want to and not deal with the variable. But then it's hard for you to debug it, because if the query doesn't work, you can't really print it out. That's certainly valid to do it that way as well. And then we want to save results right there, and we'll check if not results right there. Make sure I spell it right. That means that something didn't work. In this case, I'll just echo out the MySQL error, print it onto the page. It won't be pretty, but hopefully this page will always work, and if something doesn't work, I kind of want it not to be pretty, so it sticks out and lets me know that something broke. Right there. So now let's see if the query is working. So the query is working, but we're not printing out any members right here. So we'll go ahead and do, if you want to put them into a table, we'll put the table right here, and up maybe even table header, login, and email. Pretty sure I don't want to print out their passwords. I could print out their database ID if I wanted to. That might be something else. But usually you probably don't want to print out their ID, but just for this exercise I'll print out their ID. You probably don't want the users seeing everybody's ID, but it's pretty easy to figure out, so it's not like you're gonna prevent any hacker from finding it out anyway. And you'll see why it's pretty easy to find out the ID of certain users. So one thing that we might want to do is print out how many members we have. So we'll do that up here. There are, and of course, blank members. Let's run that in a paragraph tag. And then we'll go ahead and echo out that. And how we do it is we have this results variable, and it actually has all of the results that were returned by the query. So we can echo them out. So it's MySQL num rows, and it turned red, so we know it's the right built-in function. And then we can pass in the results right there, and now we'll refresh the page. It says there are 2 members. We're seeing the beginning of our table as well, but now we can see that there are 2 members. And if you remember, there's Fred and Foobar that we've registered so far. So there are 2 members. And now in here, we'll go ahead and print out each member, and we'll do that with a while loop. And what we can do is, while there's another function called MySQL fetch associative. There we go. And pass in the results right here. So this function is serving 2 purposes. $sign row right there. Now it's called fetch associative because it's going to grab the first row. Well, the first time we call it, it's going to grab the first row that was from the table and return it as an associative array. So now this variable will have an associative array. Now then when we call it the second time, then it returns the second row. When we call it the third time, it returns the third and the fourth and so on. Now when it runs out of rows, it returns false, which stops the while loop. So this thing is a pretty handy function right here. We call it the first time it grabbed the first row, the second time it grabbed the second row that was returned, and the third one and the fourth one, and so on until it's out of rows, and then when it's out of rows it returns false. Now false gets assigned to row, but while also is going to use row right here, and if it happens to be false, then it will stop the while loop and will get out. But if it happened to return a row, then row will be the row, but it will also be a true value, which will put us inside of the while loop where we can start printing stuff out. So there we go. Go ahead and create our table row, and then this is for ID. Echo out row. Because this is an associative, an array, we just use the column names that we have assigned, and so a lowercase ID right there is the name of the column that we want to print out right there. And so now we'll create a space for the login. I'm gonna put each one of these on a line by themselves so we can see it a little better. And there we go. And last, the email, which are all of our columns in our table. Set the hash password. I'm not going to print it out. And now we can see how that looks. And now we see there, right there. And they're sorted alphabetically by their login, and FO becomes before FR, so that's why the second one's there. Now if we want to order by the ID, we can certainly do that as well, and then it's the order in which they registered. So let's go back and register one more person. We'll go foo wham, email foo wham, and take out the H, make it smaller. And so now we're registered, and we click into the members, and we see that foo wham now has showed up as our third member that has registered. So now that we've created a page where we can see all of our members, we might want to create a profile page where we can see one of these members. So the first thing to do is to create a link to those members, so right to see each one. So I'll create a link out of their login name. Their login name has to be at least 3 characters, so I know there'll be something to click on them. So, and the page, since I'll call the page member.php. Now this page is called members with an S, but this page is just one member. So right there. And now we need a way to know which member we want to view. So I'm going to use the query string for that. I'm going to just put their ID right here on this link. So go into PHP mode again, echo out. It's easy to see. in the PHP mode. So I'm going to echo out the row ID of the user right there. So once I get that, I'll reload the page. Now these turn into links, and if I click on Fred, if you notice, we haven't created the member page, but you notice the link includes ID equals 1 for Fred. Then when we click on Foobar, his link is ID equals to 2. Right there. Now we'll view the source of this. And as you could tell, the ID is stored or is included on each one of these links. So now that we have those links made, let's go ahead and create a new page. Right here. Save this one in my web directory as member.php. Okay, we'll require the header, require once the functions page. Of course, we don't really have to include this page because it's already included by the header, but just in case we forgot. And we'll print the header here. We'll call this member page. And the link we want to highlight is member. Profile of member, say, and then we'll just put in the login somewhere, your email, and that's all that we'll include here. Now we require footer. Now, as you work on your sites, you might require them to enter more information, as we talked about before, like a first and last name, and you can always do that and then make this profile page display a little bit more information, whereas your list of members might just display their login and email. Your member page might display their first name, last name, and about, and so on. So let's see how this page looks so far. We'll click on Fred. Now hopefully we'll get Fred's name here and Fred's email right here. We also might want to put Fred's name up here in the title as well. All things that we can do, but in order to get, or at least Fred's login up there, we don't collect his name. But in order to do that, we need to connect to our database. And then write a SQL query, which is select star from users where ID is equal to. So you can just concatenate on the ID that we got out from there, and now we'll just echo out this right here. And so this is almost the exact same query we used, except for now we add this where clause that limits it to just the users where their ID is equal to 1. So let's go ahead and run this. instead of echoing it out. If now this means that we didn't find the user, or something went wrong with the query. Well, actually this means that something didn't go right with the query, but another thing that might happen is we might not actually get one user out. So then we can also go SQL num rows does not equal 1. Now we should only get one user out. There's one ID, we should only get one user, so this is making sure that we got one user. Now the query might have worked just fine, which if it worked just fine and we only included this part, it could have worked just fine but not found the user. And then there's another case where the query didn't work if there's some syntax problem where I couldn't connect to my database. The database could be down. This will catch those errors right there, and then this will catch the errors of us not finding the user. We could go if $, if not result. We'll go ahead and echo out the MySQL error. Make sure we can see it fine. Else. Now we know that no user was returned. Now I'm also going to call the exit right here, and the reason why I'm calling exit is that kills my PHP script. That means that I'm not going to do the rest of this right there. The reason why I want to do that is I don't have a name and stuff to put in here, so I don't I just want to kill my script right there. Something went wrong, they really didn't find them or something like that. So that just kills my PHP script and we don't have to worry about the rest of this. And then if it did work, we could go the member equals SQL fetch associative. If I spell it right. Of the result. And now down here, instead of putting member page, we'll just go ahead and put in there login is the subtitle, and right here put their login right there, and I'm going to just copy and paste this here and here, place that with email. And now you can see that we have Fred's information right there. Alright, so let's go back and see what happens when we click on foobar. Foobar's information, the SQL query now is using the ID of 2, and then click again, this is the ID of 3. And what happens if someone comes up here and puts an ID of somebody that doesn't exist, like ID of 4? Well, now we get the no user was returned. And notice it just exited the script without printing up the header or anything like this. We'll learn how to deal with situations like this where we can redirect users to a different page, but for now I'll just leave it as that. So now this is a show page. We can see one row of the table by clicking on these links right here. Now we know which row of the table we want by passing in the ID through the query string up above. Okay, so the next step that we're going to do is create a way to update. So maybe Fred got a new email address and he wants to update his email address, or maybe Fred doesn't like Fred as a login and he wants to change it, or maybe he wants to change his password to something he can remember a little bit easier. So we'll just create a little link called update, link to update.php, and we'll call this update info link right there. Now when we go to update somebody, we're going to need to know who we're going to update. Since right now we don't have a user authentication system or a way that somebody can log in and actually verify who they are, so we're just going to let everybody update everybody. I know it's a huge probably security hole. You're probably thinking, wow, I'd never do that on my website, that somebody edit somebody else's user information. And we're going to learn how to restrict that later, but first we're going to get the functionality working, and then we're going to learn how to restrict it to just maybe site admins and actual users, that so that the actual user who is going to only update their information, they can update their own information but not somebody else's. So we'll learn how to fix that later. But we do need to know who we're going to update, so we're going to pass in the ID through the query string up here as well. That way we can figure out who or what information we are going to update. So we'll save that right there. And now I'm going to start off, I'm going to go ahead and create a new page, and I'll save this as update.php in my web directory. And I am going to go back to my register form, and I'm just gonna steal all the code from there and copy and paste. And I know I usually say copy and pasting is bad, and there probably is a way that we can create functions out of this, but that would take a little bit longer, and I just want to get right to the point with this lecture. So we're just gonna copy and paste this. Instead of a register, we're gonna call this update information, and instead of highlighting the register link, we'll highlight the member link right there. And then down here, now again, this page is set up for a post and a get. Well, when they first click on it, it's going to be a get request, and we're going to present the form right here. So instead of welcome, please register for my cool site, we can just say update information. So another thing I'm going to comment out is actually running any sort of query right here. I'll leave this stuff in there, but we're not going to actually run this query. We're going to fix this to actually update somebody instead of insert somebody new into the database. But let's go ahead and see what this page does now. So we'll click on Fred. We have this update info link, and now we have, it says register update information. Maybe I should delete the register, and now it says update information. So now what we need to do is fill in Fred's old information. We won't fill in the passwords we'll leave those passwords there, but we will add a message. Leave password fields blank. Do not change the password. And so now they know that if they don't want to change the passwords, they could just leave the fields, their password, they could just leave these fields blank. If they do, then they can fill them in and it will change their password. But we won't put in their old password. We don't even have their old password. It's been all hashed up. So we can't even fill this back in. There's no reverse of the hash to get their password. So, but we can fill in their login and their email. So what we need to do with that is I'm going to steal this code right here. And before I do, let's go back to the members page right here. And there is an error in this code that I was about ready to copy and paste out. Not an error, just a security hole. Now notice I'm viewing foo wham right here, but I can try to manipulate this SQL statement by saying or putting or true right here. And now it says no user was returned. I can maybe put a quote mark, true. But there could be ways where people can try to manipulate this SQL statement. It's called a SQL injection, attack. And what they try to do by putting or true at the end of this, it will return everybody. And then I'll go ahead and display the first one. And usually that person's an admin. Now this is especially important if you're going to try logging in. They might try to put an or true in there and just log you in automatically as the admin. Then protected against it, we can just put a single quote marks around this one right there. So now it still works. I'll go back to the members, and there we go. Let's make sure this is an S too to highlight the members section when we're in it. So now the members section, but now we know that this works. So I'm going to go ahead and copy that out of my members page. And up here, this is if it's a post, we're going to do all of this. If not, right here in the get portion of this, we'll go ahead and do the same thing that we did before. And we also will get, let's see here, member equals MySQL fetch associative of the results. So now member is an associative array with the names being the header or the column names, and the values being the actual value of the row. So this should all work, and now we can go ahead and start assigning the login equal to member, the member's login, and the email to equal the member email. And by doing this, since we're already echoing out these values right here, they're already set up, and those things should go in. So now let's see if that works. And now their login and their old email address are put in there. So I did the same thing that I did on the show one row page. I just did the same SQL query, and then I save their login and emails, and then I insert them into the form down here. So now the updating part, well, we still want to do the same validations, and it's pretty nice that we got to copy and paste that code and just use it. Again, normally I say copying and pasting is a bad thing. There probably is a way to make this more efficient without copying and pasting, but for now, to leave this lecture a little bit simpler, we'll just copy and paste it. And now we get this valid post. One thing that we could do is we need to check to make sure the passwords weren't left blank. So if $_post, if the string length of this, the password does not equal 0, or is greater than 0, right there, then we can create a hashed password field. But if not, we don't need to. Right there. And now let's update this query. Now we go update instead of insert. Update users, and it has a little bit different format. It's set. And now we'll go ahead and we'll add in. We want to set the login equal to this, and notice I'm putting quote marks around it. That will save you from the SQL injection queries right here. They might be able to, by putting your own quote marks in there, it'll protect them from inserting stuff into your SQL query and doing nasty stuff. So then we'll also set our email equal to this. Put spaces there. And now if the hash password is set, so if hashed password, then we also want to update it, but if not, then we don't. So we do want to comma separate this. Now we're not sure if we want to put a comma at the end of this one, because it might be the last one, but we'll go ahead and set the hashed. And we'll put the comma in front, knowing that we're adding it onto this. And so now there's one more thing that we have to do. We have to add on the where clause. Put the space right there. Again, surrounded by quote marks. Now notice the ID is coming from the query string. It's not coming from the post data. So now let's see how this query prints itself out. I'm going to click register. Right here. Still getting the update information. Forgot to save it. Now if we click register, now we get update users, set login to foobar, email to this where ID equals 2, and then it says you are registered. Instead of you are registered, we might want to say information updated. So Now we'll go ahead and actually run the query, and we're going to assume that the error right here is that the login has already been taken by another user. So if they try to set their login to something that's already been taken, it won't let them do that. They still have to have a unique login. So we'll go back. Now instead of foobar, we'll say, well, maybe he wants to capitalize the foo bar, and he wants a gmail.com email address. So now we see that the information has been updated, and if we look and we go in now, and now we see that foobar's name is capitalized, and now his name is Gmail. So now the update works. I bet you guys probably noticed that anybody could go in and update anybody's information. Again, we're going to talk about security after we implement a system where people can log in. That way people can only update their own information instead of somebody else's information. Unless they happen to be an admin, then we'll let them update everybody's information as well. So the last step that we'll do today in this lecture is to delete a user out of the system. And to do that, we could create a link like this to and when a user clicks on it, then we can delete them out. But hopefully you've learned in class that you just want operations that change the database to be a unsafe operation, and if it's a link and they click on it, they're going to use the get request. I want them to use a post request. That way a web crawler won't go in and follow a link and delete users out of my system. So we'll just create a form. Method equals post, and the action will equal, and by the way, this is on the member page, so we're going to, right below the link that they click on to update their information, there'll be a little button for them to delete, and we'll call this delete.php. Now I'm going to include an input type hidden, and the name is going to be ID, and the value will equal go ahead and put their ID in. We have to echo it there. Now hidden fields are very useful to include information like the IDs and stuff, something that the user wouldn't want to enter in themselves, and you can kind of fill it in, and you won't want the user changing it, although they can change it if so I wouldn't trust it as a security feature for any matter, but this does hide the stuff on the web page. So then input type equals submit, value equals delete. So now when we look at this on foo wham, we have this delete button, and when we click on it, it goes to delete.php. But it does a post request on the delete. The ID isn't up there on the query string. The ID is sent through the post mechanism. And so now let's create a delete page. And save this in my web directory. Call it delete.php. And go ahead footer. Require the functions. First we want to do a require once. The functions. Down here we'll go print header user deleted, and we want to highlight the members link. Let's put a message here, the user has been deleted. And a little link. I'll have to surround this with paragraph tags, make it valid XHTML. Just a little navigation for them to get out of there. And then down here we'll go ahead and require the footer. Now right here we'll just well, now we'll see what that looks like. So when we didn't actually delete the user, so when we return to the list they're still there, but hopefully the user would have been deleted out. And again, this obviously seems like a security error because anybody could go in and delete users without being an admin to the site, or they could, so they could delete other users. We'll implement the security after we implement a system where users can log in. But now we need to create the SQL query that's going to delete the user out. Delete from users where, and this is really important when you're doing delete, you really need to surround these by a quote mark. That way they can't put where ID equals 1 or true, and if they did that, you'd delete everybody out of the database. So you really need to put these quote marks here, or else they might try to do a SQL injection query. And we'll just grab the ID right here. And once we implement security, we'll make sure that the person has, before we execute it, we'll make sure the person has permission to delete this user out of the database. So we won't just automatically delete them out. We'll just make sure that whoever's requesting this will make sure that they're a valid user or an admin that has permission to delete this user out. So we'll include some stuff up here that will make sure that they're not deleting somebody out that they shouldn't. But for now, we'll just let everybody delete everybody, and then let's execute the query. And now that we've executed the query, make sure that it worked. Echo out the MySQL error, and we'll exit the script because we don't want them thinking the user was deleted later on. Right there. So now we'll try to do this. We'll go ahead and delete wham out of there. No database selected. So now we're getting a SQL error, and that means that I forgot to call my connect to the database. So we'll go back and try this again. now the user's been deleted, and sure enough he doesn't show up in the list again. So let's review everything that we can do. We can register a new user, foo-wham, foo-wham@BYUH.edu, and add a password. We probably want to comment this out because we probably don't want users seeing this, but now they should be registered. Now we can click on the members link, and we can see all of our members right here. And then we can click on one, we can update their information. Let's try it with a new password. And we have hash passwords there. And the information's updated, and now they could go back to their members right there. And then we can delete users out as well. So that's all that we've accomplished in this lecture. And the next couple of lectures we'll learn how to implement some security so that will restrict users from editing other users' information and deleting other users out. But that's all that we'll cover in this lecture.